Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be reading a story off another subreddit called No Sleep. Just a disclaimer, this might be spooky for younger viewers, just to put that out there. I'm going to dedicate the whole video to this story because it is quite a long one, but it's a good read. So let's get right into it. The story is called I Was Dropped Off in the Woods for 3 days. Something inhuman followed me. In the early days of February, just before my senior year, I was prompted by my father to undertake a rite of passage, as he called it. It was to be left alone to fend for myself in a section of Tennessee's Cherokee National Forest for 3 days and 2 nights. Couldn't do it. I can't even walk up my street at night on my own without being scared. I was against the trip from the beginning. So would I. Sure, I liked hunting and camping, but this was extreme, too extreme for my tastes. But it was tradition, passed down from my father to son in my family generation. Who was I to break the tradition? So against my reservations and against the feeling that was a stupid idea, I packed up my backpack, grabbed my .306 bolt action rifle and climbed into the cab of my dad's pickup. It was a long drive, broken only stilted attempts at conversation and the heater going full blast as the tyres rolled past endless concrete. I was a little pissed that my dad was basically forcing me to do this. Easy silence only made the hours feel like days. We only stopped once at a gas station about 10 miles from our cabin. The stretch of unleaded and cheap convenience store hamburger would be the last remnants of civilization I'd see for the next 3 days. I mechanically swallowed my burger and sloped down the watery coat filled with too much ice as I turned off the highway and got into the rural back roads. It was 15 miles of dirt to my dad's cabin that his grandfather had left him, which would in turn be left to me. It was tradition after all. But I wouldn't be getting the luxury of a cabin, no. We were parking the truck, and my father was driving me up deeper into the woods on our four-wheeler to a random undisclosed point. I would then have 3 days to find my way back. What sort of tradition is this? If I succeeded, I'd become a man in my dad's eyes, and we'd also be getting a new swimming pool for the summer. It was bribery, but I would be going into my senior year in August, and having a big pool would cement my popularity. It was vain, and I was doing this for mostly selfish reasons, but I also wanted to make my dad proud. I don't care what you'd buy me, who I'm making proud. There is no way on this planet Earth you could put me in the middle of a forest, expect me to make my way back. Hell no. I stepped out of the toasted truck to the calm, frigid forest air. The cabin was a small 2-story log affair, worn from age but obviously well maintained. A new wooden wraparound porch had been built last summer and was in need of staining that we'd never got around to, but otherwise the cabin was pristine. It was a tremendously peaceful place, far removed from the troubles of civilization, and I felt I was intruding the hallowed ground. I brushed off the shiver that clawed down my spine and buttoned my long coat to my neck. Immediately, most of the chill went away and I shook off my unease. I didn't want to admit it, but a part of me was looking forward to the trip. Some primal part of me relished the opportunity to put all my survival skills I'd been taught over the years to the test. Before I could take a step into the cabin, my dad came around the front of the truck and held out his hand. "Thomas, hand me your bag," he demanded, in a curt, nonsense tone. My dad and I looked so much alike in the face, the same unruly dark hair and deep-set eyes, but I could never hope to measure up to his terrifying drill sergeant voice. As he told me to hand my backpack, I did so without question, and he immediately went inside, telling me to wait on the porch. I marched across the wood and sat on the rocking chair while my dad bustled around inside. Pots and pans and metal scraped against metal as he worked, breaking the sounds of the forest around me. For half an hour, my dad bruised himself with the bag before the screen door as he ambled back outside. "I loaded everything you'll need for 3 days in the bag. You'll have a couple days of food, but it's only for an emergency. I also added a flare gun for an actual emergency." Dad kept his voice rough and only used that tone with me when he wanted me to really pay attention to him. He had a good reason. As fun and full of tradition as this experience would be for me, I was still spending several nights alone in the woods, and in the untamed wilderness, anything could happen. He handed me back the bag, and it was stuffed full. A lot had been added to it, so much that string strained against my nylon fabric. I hefted it onto my shoulder and thought it was much heavier than before. It wasn't cumbersome or unwieldy. I could carry it all day and didn't think it would bother me. After he handed me the pack, We unloaded the four-wheeler from the back of his truck and we set off to the small walking trail next to the house. From memory, the path went on for dozens of miles and followed the stream as it snaked through the wilderness. We rode until the dirt road ended and humanity fell away into the deep woods. The ride got bumpy. We wound around trees and over small rocks for a minute. I was afraid of hazards. My dad was an experienced outdoorsman, though I knew these woods well. A few hours later, we'd apparently reached the destination. It was a small clearing nestled under a copse? No idea. The remains of a previous campsite, long since put our rest in the centre of the dirt surrounded by a circle of rocks. I was up here scouting a couple of weeks ago, so I knew the route I'd take to get back, he said cheekily. Be careful, son, and call me if there's an emergency. I'm only a few hours away and I should be able to see the flare if there's trouble. Yeah, because I'll be able to get a signal out here, I replied, holding up my useless phone. Well, there's always the flare gun, but I'm confident you'll be fine, and besides, the flare really only there if you decided to give up, he said, laughing. I would have given up there and then. I would have like, right, saves your flare gun, let's go home. First thing I did was take my inventory and catalogue my belongings. I undid the pack and carefully emptied its contents onto the ground. I had a pair of long johns, some extra socks and underwear, a box of matches, a hunting knife and a miniature shovel, a Ziploc bag filled with a blend of spices, canteen water, 2 days of vacuum-sealed rations and water pouches, flare gun, along with my hammock and blanket. I had everything needed to make camp and survive. Hunting skills proved to be lacking. I had over 30 miles of wilderness to hack through before I hit the main roads and could circle back to the cabin on the main road. Dad told me it should take me at least 2 days, 3 if I didn't get lucky with my hunts. I had a few hours to kill before nightfall. I wanted to get some miles in and find my bearings. The best bet, I thought it would be like a hike along until the stream ended, but somewhat close to the trail but not on it, as that would be cheating, but it would give me an excellent landmark to keep me orientated. So with mild hesitation, I packed up and set off through the woods. It had been a good couple of months since I'd last been in the woods, and I'd never been this deep in them. It was quiet, only disturbed by the rustling trees and occasional scuffle of an animal nearby as I trudged over the rough grounds and rock. Staying nearer on the trail would have been defeated on purpose of the experience, so I stayed off it as much as I could and only travelled through the woods themselves. Of course, it slowed my progress considerably, and I only managed to walk about 2 miles before I started thinking about stopping. I would have to hunt before it got dark if I didn't want to go hungry, and I only had an hour or two before light fell enough to make hunting possible. After searching around for about 10 minutes, I found a good spot to set up camp for the evening, and I dropped my bag and grabbed my rifle, chambered and cartridge, and double-checked the safety. My game was rabbit, since I didn't have the tools needed to string up and gut a deer. I set off and crept through the brush, looking for signs of a nearby den. Rabbits are most active at dawn or dusk, and was perfect time to hunt them. Less than 5 minutes later, I found signs of rabbit trails and the underbush of a few hundred yards from camp. I leaned against the tree, just waiting. The rabbit I wanted appeared half an hour later, hopping out of the bush without a care in the world. It was a plump eastern cottontail. It stopped and sniffed, giving me my opening. The crack of my rifle pierced the air, and the cottontail dropped dead. I hit my mark, taking it to the neck so I didn't spoil any of the meat. It was a decent-sized rabbit, more than enough for dinner. I bagged it and went to the camp. It was fading as I reached my campsite, which made fire priority 1. I grabbed the mini shovel and dug a small pit in the centre of the camp, spreading the loose dirt around the perimeter. I picked up a bundle of sticks, and kindling just cleared the site, which gave me an ample dead wood to burn. So I piled the bundle into the ground with some dead leaves and twigs and got a nice fire going. When I had light to work by, I cleaned the rabbit, making sure not to perforate the bowels and remove the organs and skin. I walked away from the camp and buried off and hid in a small hole next to a tree. The meat was cleaned. I rubbed some spices into the meat and removed some of the taste of game and skewered it with a stick I sharpened. While the meat cooked over a makeshift spit, I tied my hammock to the only trees close enough for it to work. By the time my bed was ready, I had to turn the meat and get it ready to eat. A sprinkle of seasoning garnished and piping hot meat, and I dug it when it was fully cooked. It wasn't the best cook, and I didn't have the right tools and ingredients, so the meat was a little dry and bland, but filled me up nicely. And I washed it down with a swig of my canteen. I even had leftovers. I wrapped them up in a cloth and sat them by the fire, ready to be eaten for breakfast in the morning. With nothing else to do for the evening, the night had fallen an hour ago. I decided to turn in for the evening and get an early start in the morning. I had many miles to cover and would have to hunt again at some point the next day for dinner. I nodded off, listening to the sounds of the forest as they lulled me into a deep sleep. In the morning, I woke up refreshed from one of the best night's sleep I've ever had, eager to take on the day. I was in such a good mood that it took me a few minutes to realise something was off. In the middle of packing my hammock and gathering my supplies, I couldn't help but notice that the leftover rabbit was missing from next to the fire. I searched around for it in vain, thinking the wind might have caught it and blown it away from the camp, but there was nothing. I chalked it up to a wild animal, but that unsettled me. Deer didn't often eat meat, and didn't think deer would get anywhere near my campsite. The smoke from the embers of the fire would have been enough to keep most animals away. Black bears were common enough in the forest, but they should be still in hibernation during this time of year. Right now, there wasn't anything larger than a deer in these woods, so unless it was a coyote, it had to have been a deer, but there were no tracks anywhere around my campsite, so no answers came to me. I'd packed up camp and went to relieve myself when I found something that confused and terrified the hell out of me. I went to piss by the tree where I buried the offal of the rabbit last night, so like the rabbit carcass and the bits you can't eat. And right where I'd buried them was a hole. It was rough with a long claw marks gouged deep into the dirt, as if something had ripped into the ground to get what I had buried. I'd buried them deep enough not to attract the scent of wild animals, and I'd never seen claw marks like the ones next to the tree. I didn't know what to make of it. Wild animals weren't that smart, and they were skittish by nature. No animal would risk getting close to a human unless they were starving, and no human had claws like that I've ever seen. Without hesitation, I grabbed my rifle and racked a cartridge. The air was calm and birds sang through the treetops. It was a lovely morning and I was petrified. I walked the campsite in a circle, spreading out, searching for any tracks or signs. The only ones I'd found were some deer tracks about 100 yards from the camp that were at least a day old. There was nothing else even remotely resembling the marks that I'd found. There was nothing for me to find, and even though I was freaked out, I still had to hike back to civilization. As the miles wore on, I began to rationalise the experience, thinking it would be nothing more than a hungry animal looking for food and brave enough to sneak into my camp. I just hadn't buried the offal deep enough, and some of the critter had smelt it, that was all. As the day wore on, there was nothing to differentiate my delusions. The woods were normal, no ominous warnings, no foreboding feelings, just nature alive and well in the midday sun. I managed to bag another rabbit, purely on coincidence as it scampered out of the tree line. I snapped off a shot and my aim was lucky. I'd taken it in the head, which left a little of its skull behind, but it left the meat ripe for the taking. I made good time through the woods, so I stopped and quickly cleaned the rabbit, leaving the offal and skin where they lay. If something wanted to eat it, then let it. After the rabbit was clean, I wrapped the meat in a cloth and stowed it away. I was hungry from the hike, and the fact that my breakfast had been stolen that morning, I still wanted to put some more miles into my boots before it got dark. I wanted to be far away from my campsite just in case. As the sunlight faded from the canopy of my aching feet demanded a break, I found a spot and set up camp. It was a small campsite nestled up against a rocky mound that stretched skyward for a couple dozen feet, with a slanted shelf near the top. I felt comfortable having my back to the wall, and brace of trees next to the rocks ensured I could set up my hammock. I redid the camp, built a roaring fire twice as large as the one from last night just to scare away any nearby animals, and cooked the rabbit to perfection. There was still plenty of leftovers again, but this time I was careful to stow the meat inside my backpack, which I kept near to my hammock. Exhaustion had worn me down from the many miles I'd walked that day, and I was eager to get some sleep. I laid my head on my pillow and was out like a light. The stillness woke me. Like a veil of silence had been draped over the woods. Not a single sound rose from the forest floor other than the rustling of leaves in the wind, not even cricket. Animals intensively got quiet in the presence of predators, but it was unlike anything I'd ever felt before, and lay in my hammock, straining my ears to listen to any sound that I could. There was nothing but wind. The fire had died out, leaving only coals that sparked every time a stiff breeze rolled. The moon was fat in the sky and gave me ample light to see by as I started up the trees. For some reason, I was terrified to get up and look around. My rifle was next to me, resting just by my head against the tree. I could grab it in seconds if there was a round in the chamber, but I couldn't reach for my gun. I couldn't do anything other than stare straight ahead and try not to move an inch, because I realised something was watching me. It started as a tickle of paranoia on the back of my neck as my hair stood on end, but it grew to fear as sweat beaded from my forehead. There was a presence in the woods. Its eyes were on me, and it was angry. Something was watching me and it hated me. It's a hard to describe feeling, the anger that was directed towards me, but I knew what it was on a primal level. Instinctual, right along the fear of being alone in the dark, I knew that feeling too. The presence persisted for a few minutes and didn't fade. Sweat poured down my neck as I thought, "Stay still." Eventually, the silence of fear got to me and I had to do something. I couldn't take it anymore and leapt from my hammock, hitting the ground hard. I ignored the pain radiating from my arms and scrambled for my rifle, scanning all around me, trying to find whatever it was. As I spun around, I saw it, perched on the rocks above me. For a single split second, a flash of neon blue eyes stared back at me from an angular, too pale body before it slunk out of sight. My heart pounded in my chest and my head felt fuzzy, like ants crawling over my brain. It became hard to breathe and I fought to keep from passing out. I was scared out of my mind because whatever that thing had been, it wasn't human and it wasn't an animal. It was a monster. I didn't sleep that night. I built up the fire and huddled around it, clutching my rifle till morning. Screw tradition and screw these woods. I was heading back to the cabin at first light and wasn't stopping till I reached it. Nothing else happened through the night, but as dawn broke over the mountains, my nerves were shot to hell and my eyes ached with strain keeping them open. I stumbled to my feet, kicked out the fire and slung my backpack over my shoulder. I left the hammock tied where it was and set off towards the stream. I was going to follow the trail and I'd be back at the cabin well before nightfall. I took an hour of walking, stumbled over uneven terrain till I found the stream, and from there I found the worn trail. I followed it for hours as the sun rose high in the sky. I was so tired, but the fear of death and that monster were the only things that kept me putting one foot in front of the other. I was hungry, thirsty, and beyond everything else, utterly exhausted, but I kept pushing forward no matter how slow and how tired I was. I still had the rabbit tied up in my pack, but I couldn't stop and eat. The day wore on. I began to recognise parts of the terrain and knew I was close to the cabin. I was so elated that I didn't pay attention to where I was walking and rolled my ankle on a small rock that jutted out from the side of the trail. I lost my balance, hit my head on a nearby tree branch. Everything went black. I awoke to dusk. It'd been a couple of hours. Whether from the blow to the head or the exhaustion, whatever it was, I was still in the woods, and night was coming quickly. The monsters never appeared during the daytime, so I thought it was safe in the light, but light was running out and I still had a mile or so till I reached the cabin. I picked myself off the ground and dusted off the dirt. I grabbed my rifle, checked that it was still loaded, and I flicked the safety off. My finger stood a millimetre from the trigger and I kept my head on a swivel as I jogged on the trail back to the cabin. Relief swept through me when I saw the unwrapped porch coming to view. I nearly sagged to my knees as I reached the cabin, as the last of the orange bled from the purple skyline. I had made it. "Dad," I yelled as I ran to the porch. "Dad, we gotta go." I ran around to the front door and stood stock still as my blood ran cold. The door to the cabin was open and my dad was lying halfway inside the hallway of the porch. He'd been mauled. His body was nothing but ribbons and scrapes of flesh that only half resembled what a human should look like. I stared in silence, my mind not comprehending what I was just seeing. He'd been wearing the red and black checkered flannel shirt I'd gotten him for his birthday. It was the only way I could tell it was my dad. His face had been ripped from his skull, to white bone peeked out from his empty eye sockets. The stench was ungodly. A mixture of fresh meat and the iron tang of blood filled the air. I clutched my stomach and heard a wail of wooden floorboards sinking to my knees as my throat burned raw. I heaved my guts out. Absolute panic gripped my sanity, and I took it for a joyride as I tried to fail to come to terms with the fact that my father was dead, had been ripped to pieces by whatever was outside stalking me in the dark. I had to leave, had to get as far away from this place as I could, or else I'd be next. I screamed wordlessly and backed away from the porch. I turned and ran to the truck. It was my only way of escape, and I had to hurry. Night had already fallen. I scrambled the driver's side and picked up and yanked on the handle hard enough to break it, but it held and I opened the door after a second sticking. I climbed into the cab and threw down the visor, where my dad usually kept the keys, but they weren't there. The only other place they could be was the pocket of my dad's jeans, and I would have to go get them. I clutched my rifle tight, exited the vehicle. I knew I had to be fast. I knew I needed to already be far away from the woods, but my feet wouldn't carry me any further. I stared at the mutilated remains of my father and tried not to throw up again or break down in madness. "Come on, you can do this." Just put one foot in front of the other. Do it now. My rational mind screamed at me, trying to override the panic I felt at that moment. I stepped forward an inch at a time, and before I knew it, I was back, staring down at my dad. I breathed through my mouth, not being able to stomach the smell again, and crouched carefully of the sticky and drying blood. I squinted through the eyelashes and patted my dad's pants. The keys were in his left pocket, so as quickly as I could, I stepped to the side and dug through them. My hands clutched around the metal key, and I yanked my prize free, nearly stumbling from force. With the key in my hand, I bolted from the porch back to the truck. I just wish I'd been faster. As I reached the open cab, flesh thudded against wood, and I turned, searching for the sound. Movement from above and drew my gaze, and I finally got a good look at what had been chasing me through the God-forsaken woods. It was on the roof of the cabin, clinging to the side of the slanted roof with ease. The monster was humanoid, but it crawled on like all fours like an animal. Its skin was pale like paper and thick and rough, leathery almost. But what marked it as being something inhuman was its head. It bore ethereal blue eyes and lit up the night, and a large arrowed face that tapered into point near its mouth, the mouth which opened, revealing thousands of minuscule needlepoint silver teeth and rolls stretching down its throat. The creature's eyes never left mine and glinted with malicious intelligence. It upturned its teeth, many, into the gruesome smile. I didn't think, I didn't panic, I just reached. I raised my rifle and fired. The bullet whizzed past its head and took it in the shoulder. Bright white blood spurted from the wound and splashed across the roof of the cabin to drip down. Let out a high-pitched shriek of pain and recoiled from the shock. It slid down the roof. It let out a high-pitched shriek of pain and recoiled from the shock. It slid down the roof into the tree line faster than I could line up in a second shot. When it broke from my line of sight, I sprinted to the truck, tossed my bag and rifle, and slid into the driver's seat. Thankfully, the truck started on first try, and the engine roared to life. I flicked on the high beams, threw the truck in reverse, and spun around as fast as I could. The shadows of the forest rift in chaos as I sped down the trail, going too fast for comfort, but my mind and nerves were sharp. It was all I could not do to floor the pedal and speed away as quickly as I could. I was driving recklessly, taking curves too sharply and doing everything in my power not to fishtail into a tree when a thud landed on the roof of the truck, crumbling the aging metal. I screeched in panic and moved the wheel, trying to throw it off. I spun the wheel too much and clipped an overgrown tree in the process. I tried to overcorrect myself, but only ended up slamming the side of the truck into the tree line. The truck crunched to a halt, the passenger's side crumbling like a bent can as tree branches snapped, sounding wooden gunshots through the forest. Whatever was on the truck was flung into the side as we crashed. It flew off the hood and hit the tree further into the forest. Bones cracked, and when it fell to the dirt, it left a smear of white blood across the bark. I tried to start the truck again, but it just groaned and wouldn't turn. With a half growl, half groan, the creature picked its bleeding body up the ground and glared at me, its neon eyes glowing even brighter as it shrieked and crawled towards me. I grabbed my rifle and left the truck. I could follow the monster, its eyes alone, and perched my rifle on the hood of the truck and took aim. It was slow as it crept towards me, giving me plenty of time to line up a perfect shot. I had my crosshairs centered right between its eyes and rested my finger on the trigger. A split second away from firing, the creature let out another scream, much higher pitched than the others, and my blood jerked on its own accord. My hand spasmed and I squeezed the trigger. My shot went wide, flying off into the woods and thudding into an old tree. It had been my last bullet. My rifle only held 4 shots, and I hadn't brought any extra ammo. I squeezed the trigger again and again. Terror gripped me as I slung along the earth, leaving mild white trail blood behind it. I threw the gun and ran for the truck, for the knife in my back. I wasn't going to let it get me. I wasn't going to end up as food. Mutilated corpse like my dad. I was going to kill it for myself. If that failed, I wouldn't let it eat me. The thing was on me before I reached the cab. It slammed into the side of the door, pinning me as it was halfway in the door. I lunged from my bag as the monster opened its jaws wide and a bit through the metal door like it was cardboard. It ripped a chunk free and spat it on the ground as it eyed me with rage and hunger. My hand closed around the bag and it tore strings, grabbing the knife and was at the top of the bag. I slid it from its sheath as the creature was poised to bite. I jammed the knife the hilt in the side of its face just below its glowing blue eyes. It reared back in pain, sending a mind-pounding shriek of pain spitting through my psyche. It stopped my heartbeat for a second, and it jumped away from the truck and tried to dislodge the knife I stuck in its skull. I thought then I'd landed a lucky blow and was going to leave, that I'd be able to get back in the truck and escape the forest. But more howls joined the first, and two more of the monsters slung from out the shadows. This is where I die. It was the only thought running through my head. I couldn't run from them. I couldn't fight them. I was going to die, but I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I grabbed my torn bag and ran into the woods as fast as I could. I was desperate to escape, but the howls and thuds of too many legs paddling through the dirt behind me were told me I wasn't going to escape. They were close to my heels, and the only thing that saved my life that night was gravity and my own clumsiness. I tripped on a branch and tumbled to the ground as one of them sailed over, mouth wide as the 1,000 needles closed around empty air. It hit the ground a few feet away and turned, eyeing me up. I backpedaled, but hit a tree as it lunged a second time. With nothing else in my hands, I brought my bag up as it clamped down, throwing me into the forest floor. Its teeth closed around my bag, ripping the nylon shreds, but my mini shovel got lodged in its throat, and it couldn't close its mouth all the way. Clothing and food pulled out its jaws and scrambled out from underneath it. My hand hit something plastic as I crawled away from the creature, and in the dark of the woods I couldn't fail to make out the bright orange handle of the flare gun. It was a long shot, but it was the last weapon I had, and I clung to it as I stood up and ran away. I didn't get as far as the monster chomped through the metal shovel, as it was a toothpick, and spat out the remains of my backpack. It howled in rage and ran after me. Knowing I only had one shot, I stopped running, dropped to my knees and fired. Daylight split the night as my eyesight was obliterated by the burning red flare as it streaked through the air and hit the monster in the face. The creature went up in a gulf of flame. Its flesh sizzled and popped like grease in a pan as it cracked and blackened in seconds. It howled in agony, screaming such a high-pitched sound that my ears bled, and I fell to my knees. By the time I rose to my feet and wiped the blood from my ears, it was dead. It was now nothing but a charged carcass burning under the crackling fire. The flare was still burning, illuminating the night and showing me the other two creatures that had crept upon us. I was out of weapons and I was out of hope, but they stayed back, just at the tree line, watching me as the flaming carcass of their friend. Fire was their weakness, it seemed, and even though I had no more flares, I bluffed them. It was the most reckless thing I could have done, but I had no other options left. I raised the empty flare gun and they flinched. They took a step back and stayed low to the ground, like they were ready to bolt. I pressed my luck and took a step forward. They turned and ran as fast as they could, deeper into the forest, howling as they did so. As soon as they were out of sight, I ran myself. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, not caring about the scrapes and scratches from the branches whipping at my face. I only cared about my own survival. The road leading to the highway and ran for hours. There were too many miles between me and the highway, but I didn't care. I just kept running. By the time I hit the pavement, it was daybreak and I knew I could stop running, but I kept on because I had nothing else but the run. If I stopped, it would mean accepting what had just happened, and I didn't think my mind would survive. I ran until I hit the gas station, which stopped at only 3 days ago, what felt like a lifetime ago. The gas station attendant took one look at me, out of breath with bloody torn clothes, and called the police. He was kind enough to give me all the water I wanted while he waited for the police. I drank it in silence while I sat huddled in on myself, trying to calm my racing heart and not to think. It took the cops nearly an hour to arrive from the nearest town, and when they did, I finally had to tell them my story. They didn't believe me because, of course, they wouldn't. I sounded insane, raving about monsters with glowing blue eyes and white blood like a madman. However, the officer was patient and kind, taking down my statement word for word despite the look on his face. I told them where to find the cabin, the truck, everything. They found it all right where I told them it would be, except for my dad's body. It was gone. The only sign it had been there at all was the bloodstains. The police chalked it up as a wild animal attack, attributing my story to be just that, a story by a scared teenager who witnessed an animal kill his father. The reporters, the kids at school, hell, even my mother, they didn't believe me. But I know the truth. I'm not crazy. There's something evil in that forest. Whatever it was, whatever those effing nightmares were, there's more of them than that, and they will burn just fine. If you go camping in the Tennessee forest at night, be careful, learn from my story, and for the love of God, carry a fire saw. Well, that creeped me out, like mid reading it, because I had actually only read like the first quarter of it, and then I was like, I'll keep it for the video, and it scared me. But that was a great story. The story is by the Reddit user Epsilon Undying. I hope you didn't mind me using it on my channel. I'll link the link of it in the description. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you like my videos. I will be posting more creepy stories of like No Sleep, Let's Not Meet, and possibly Scared Shitless. They're all subreddits on Reddit, so if you want to go check those out. But again, if you liked my video, please subscribe. I will be posting more of this sort of content. If you guys yourselves have any stories that you want me to read, put the link or the story in the comments for me and I'll make it as my next video. Again, thanks so much for watching and bye!